Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Cathleen Elle, author, speaker, certified success coach, and master healer.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorianne. I am that gal from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we're very pleased to have Cathleen Elle. She's a best-selling author, transformational speaker, certified success coach, and master healer. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's an honor to be here with both you, Lorianne and Roy. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. I understand, besides being an author, you're a healer and you're a suicide prevention advocate.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. In 2010, my entire life changed when my son took his life, and he wrote a note saying he didn't want me to be at his service. So my life shattered. And, prior to that, I was a government official. I was a politician for 25 plus years. I served as a legislator. I worked for the governor. I was a lobbyist. So I had, on the outside, my life seemed as if it was all put together in a nice little package. But on the inside, I was dying slowly and painfully because my son struggled for several years, or most people didn't know that. He was a gregarious, sweet 19-year-old boy that was friends with everybody and was just this caring soul. And so most people didn't realize how much he struggled in his life. And so for him to write a note saying that he didn't want me at his service, it truly shattered me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I it's almost, we're speechless about that. So how did you move forward with this?
So fortunately, and many people wouldn't say this, but fortunately, as a toddler, infant, I went through some pretty traumatic events in my life. I was born to an abusive alcoholic, and I ended up experiencing physical, emotional, and sexual abuse by family and friends. And so I had a lot of trauma in my life. And through moving through those traumas, or actually experiencing those traumas and believing that there had to be something more than what I had experienced, that gave me the strength to actually survive my son's suicide. And yet I was only surviving. And I found myself actually lying upon Logan's grave, begging, pleading, just screaming, whoever, whatever took my son, please take me too. I was a single mom. His sister lived, almost 1,500 miles away because she was in college, and I was alone. And I just wanted to die as well. I didn't want to live anymore because I felt such shame that I could not save my son. If I was supposed to be this success in society, how could I not save my son? How could I not have seen that this was going to happen? And as I was lying there screaming, I don't know how long, but eventually I suddenly heard from out of nowhere this very clear message from above that said, if this happened in your life, then you're meant to do something with it. Now do it. And it was those words, that connection of what the higher power to say, you have to keep moving and you have the voice, so fortunately I had the experiences of being a legislator and being in politics. So I had enough media contacts. I had enough, an ability to be able to speak clearly publicly. So I just became an advocate. And for about a year, I spoke out about suicide prevention. I talked about the signs. I talked about how you shift the language around suicide, because people still today talk about committing suicide. And the reason why that term was formed to begin with, because it was a crime at one point in history to die by suicide. And it also was prohibited for certain religions for people to have a service in their church or be buried in their cemetery. So it was a crime at one time. So I can see where the history is coming from. And yet now we have proof that more than 90% of those who die by suicide die with a diagnosed or undiagnosed illness of mental illness. And so now I share with people about how they talk about suicide. So if someone takes their life, is either take their life, they died by suicide, or they completed suicide. It's very much for people to remember this. It's very much like no one says people died, committed cancer or committed diabetes or committed a heart attack or any other form of transitioning in the world. So I started doing that, but I did that without moving through a healing journey. And so every time I spoke up, every time I spoke out publicly and, on TV and on radio, it would take me days and sometimes weeks to get back up because it would crush me of the intense pain, because there's body pain, there's emotional pain, there's depression, just throw it out there. There's all kinds of emotions that are involved in sudden loss like that. And so I just felt like I really was torturing myself. I didn't know that then, but as I look back today, I was really torturing myself because I felt like I deserved to be tortured because I should have saved my son, that it was all my fault. And those are the emotions that people go through when they've experienced suicide. And so I started to step into my healing journey 1 hour at a time, one day at a time, 1 week at a time. And I started to move through the intense emotions that were trapped in my body, the intense voices in my head of it's all your fault, all of the limiting beliefs, and started to move through that energy that was stuck in my body. And I started to realize that, we all have a purpose here, and my purpose is to assist people to move through their healing journey and to let them know that they're not alone, that there's compassion to be held for everyone, and that it is an experience that we will all go through. Not suicide necessarily, although it's definitely on the rise, but we will all experience a loss in one form or another. So my heart's calling is to assist others to move through their journey from the experiences that I had and the healing journey that I have.
Prior to your son committing suicide, did you have any idea that may happen? Any indication?
Actually, Roy, I did. I just when I did, and we struggled. I started to create boundaries, and he didn't like the boundaries, and you know how that goes with teenagers, and then there's other influences in his life that they had a certain expectation of what their relationship was and what was good for him and wasn't. So he had some challenges. And actually, even one day we were in the grocery store and I had asked him, and now again, I know that I channeled this. I didn't know it at the time, but I know that I channeled it. And I just blurted out, Logan, have you ever thought about taking your life? Or have you ever thought about suicide? Not taking your life. I said, have you ever thought about suicide? And he said, how'd you know that? So he definitely had. And so we tried to assist the best we could, and in a very short period of time, 3 different doctors, psychologists, counselors diagnosed him with 3 different things. One was severe depression, one was bipolar, and one was schizophrenic, all in a very short period of time. So even the medical field didn't know what was happening for my son. And I don't place blame. That's their profession, and they do the best they can with what they know as well. And so, I did have some inkling that he was not in a great space. And I will say, Roy, none of us ever expect that our children could actually take their life, because we could not fathom that they did not know how much they were loved when they were here. And the fact is, from those who have attempted suicide and survived, say that it has nothing to do with how much people love them. What it has to do with is they're in such intense pain, and they believe that they've caused so much pain in their families and friends, and that the world would be better off without them. So it is not a selfish thing. They actually sacrifice their life because they believe in their limiting beliefs. They're where they are in their painful situation. They believe that the world would be better off without them. And clearly that's not true. And, you know, today I connect with Logan. Logan is my partner in my business and writing the books that we've written. And he helps guide me in the direction that he feels we can be best of service, the best that we can be on this universe to help others move through their journey. So if I had to sacrifice my son's life in my experience, so thousands and millions of other people could actually either prevent suicide, move through their depression or anxiety, so where they actually, you know, can live, or if they can respond to a loss in a different way, then I'm here.
I had a sister, her son.
Took his life.
Yeah, and it's been September will be 4 years ago, and she still hasn't got past it.
Yeah.
She struggles every day.
And Roy, you never get past it. You never get over it. What you do is you have to be willing to step into the pain and move through it. And while a lot of people don't do that is because they feel like they're going to get stuck in that intense pain. And they feel like the pain, and I can speak this to be true. I felt like the pain that I was in was so intense. I couldn't imagine stepping into it more because I thought it would be even more intense. And I also thought that I would never actually move through it. I would be stuck in that. So it's easier to push it down, to mask it, to avoid it in any way possible. But the fact is, it has a hold on you. We end up shackling ourselves in this jail cell of pain when we don't need to.
Yeah, and I think that there's like the blame as well. You know, the one thing my sister felt after she lost her daughter, I do apologize, this is a very sensitive, you know, subject at this point, but one thing that she said, she became incredibly sensitive to anybody that might even say something that might equate her to being a not so great mother.
Yeah.
She has a son, and even, you know, if somebody says something about her son, and yet they don't necessarily mean it that way, but she's so hypersensitive to that because she feels a certain amount of, like, she's blaming herself to a certain amount for her daughter's passing.
Yeah, and what happened for me, I will say, I projected my anger out into the world. And I projected my blame out in the world when I was lobbying. Just a quick example. I was still lobbying for the association that I was the CEO of. And I was sitting in a committee room, Commerce. I know exactly which committee room it was. And I was familiar, you know, most of them were my colleagues before. So now I was familiar with the process. I know the diplomatic way that you are supposed to speak. And, you know, like I got all of the politically correct things to do, but they were debating something that I felt that was very frivolous and just at the time I thought was ridiculous. And I spoke up and I just was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever experienced. What is wrong with you? Why are you wasting your time on this? Like, as a lobbyist, I just spewed it out of me. And afterwards I was like the whole room went silent. And as I realized it actually came out of my mouth, I'm like, yikes, this is the time that I am probably better off to go start my healing journey instead of spewing out my anger to the world. Because really what happens is that when we're projecting blame or we're projecting anger, we're really angry at ourselves. We're really angry at the world. We're angry. We're full of self-blame and self-hate. And it actually ends up causing disease. You know, dis-ease causes disease within our bodies. You know, you break your bone, you get cancer, you get depression, you know, like all of those labels are coming from the limiting beliefs and the energy that's stuck in your body. And there's a way that you can move through it so you do not have to hold it, and you can live a very healthy, connected, love-filled life. You know, I'm an example of leaving my career, my home state, my friends, my marriage behind, and walking away and starting a new business in healing, because that's my heart's calling. That took courage, that took the willingness to move through a healing journey, and it took the ability to trust that I'm being guided. I'm being guided.
Well, you know, to me, it would be bad enough your son committing suicide, but for him to say he doesn't want you at your funeral, at his funeral,
Yeah.
I mean, that talk about right through the heart, that
Yeah.
had to be excruciating for you.
Yeah. And Roy, I just want to just mention, as I mentioned earlier, you know, as you start to talk about suicide, the 3 ways to actually address it is die by suicide. You know, like, I'm not lecturing. I just want to share again that, you know, that take their lives. But yes, you're right. You know, fortunately, I did not know that he had written a letter. I had asked, because he didn't take his life at my home. Thankfully, again, you know, like I have some blessings around this. I truly do. And I had asked if there was a letter, and they said no. And a month later, I went to a medium in another state. So she didn't know anything about it. She had no idea. So actually, Logan had died in South Carolina. I lived in Vermont, and this person lived in New York. So there was no connection whatsoever. And she said, there's something in the records, the police records, that you don't know. And I'm like, that gave me hope at the moment. I was like, oh, good. Maybe it wasn't suicide. Maybe it was accidental. And so, I mean, it was a much longer conversation than that. She was right in many things. And that specific thing was really beyond my imagination that could happen. And so I called the police department in South Carolina, and the person who was the responder to Logan's suicide was actually the person who picked up the phone. Another synchronicity here. It is the way. And so I questioned him and said, how do you know it was a suicide? And he was very defensive. And I kept pushing. And he said, because of the note. And I'm like, what note? And so the note had other things in it. And I'm only going to speak to what had pertained to me specifically. And I said, I need to see it, because I needed to see that it was actually Logan's handwriting. And of course it was. And fortunately, I had a friend with me at the time that this happened. And so you can easily go back there. I've never, ever experienced that kind of pain before. I mean, I thought the death of Logan by suicide was hard enough. And then to have that on top of it, it took my breath away. It just took my breath away. And then I had to inform his sister, which was even harder, you know, and the fear. So there's just so, you know, sudden, unexpected loss is complicated. It is not an easy, you know, death can be challenging at times, but it is not an easy subject to maneuver. It's not an easy journey. And I can promise you, whoever's listening, I can promise you that if you're willing to step into the healing process, that there is hope, there is inspiration, that you can move through it, that you're not alone. And you won't get stuck in the pain. You'll actually be able to feel some joy and connection to your loved ones. And there's signs, you get to see signs everywhere that your loved one's there.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the note, because I had a cousin. He was he was a boy-girl cousin, twins.
Yeah.
And he committed suicide. He happened to call my other cousin, just talk to her and tell her he loved her.
Yeah.
She said she knew there was something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But he hung up. Well, anyway, he committed suicide. And my aunt and uncle and her struggled because they didn't know why.
Right.
And it was months afterwards. Even like the police didn't even say anything about a note, nothing. And then it was probably 5 or 6 months later, my uncle and aunt got the suicide note in the mail.
In the
And
mail?
yeah, from the police department.
Wow.
And but it gave them peace because he told them he loved them. It was nothing they did. It was just things he couldn't handle. They were
Right.
great parents and all that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it gave them comfort because they knew
Sure.
from him
Mhm.
why, and I
Yeah.
didn't before. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't believe that you don't get that information. You know,
Well, you know, I am certainly not going to place blame, and I think there were circumstances around this particular note for others involved, and the choices they made out of love, out of protection, and probably more than likely wondering if I'd be able to handle it anyways, because you know, we had two services, one in South Carolina and one in Vermont. And the one in Vermont was huge because of the people who knew him and knew me. And it was more of a statewide thing, more than a smaller community. And I mean, I was barely functioning as it was. Had I known there was a note, I just don't even know how I would have even walked up that aisle. I don't know. And so as I look back, you know, there's always a pearl within the oyster. And there was all kinds of muck and yuck and stuff that you don't want to go through. I felt like I was in a quicksand. Every step I took, every move I made, I felt I was going deeper and deeper into the quicksand. And it's painful, and yet what has come from that painful experience, because I chose to step into it, I chose to work through some of the emotions, and what's come from that is this beautiful of service of assisting others. And clearly I'm not advocating for people to take their own life, not at all the case. Matter of fact, please don't do that. You know, your life matters. We all have a purpose. We all have a heart's calling. What's happening is that the pain is just blocking your own light. And so I just feel like, you know, all of our lives have challenges. And I like to describe my life as a little bit like a strawberry rhubarb pie. Have you ever had strawberry rhubarb pie?
no, I haven't.
It's good.
So there's a lot of sweetness in the strawberry, and there's a lot of tartness, like bitterness in the rhubarb. And so that's kind of like what my life has been. There has been a ton of bitterness. There's been a ton of trauma in my life. And yet there's been a ton of beautiful things in my life. I was elected to be a legislator at 29 years old with no college degree. I served on judiciary for 6 years and named civil unions. I served on appropriations without a college degree. I served for the governor of the state of Vermont and was the interagency chair on housing, homelessness, and transportation. I was the director of, you know, homeless policy for the entire Agency of Human Services without a college degree. Went back to college as a public servant and got a college degree, and then became a CEO. You know, like, so I've had some pretty amazing things in my life. So I could choose to focus on all the challenges, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. I could choose to stay in that downward spiral. I could have chosen that. And yet there was something within me. And I believe there was just like this calling, like I said, when I was laying on Logan's gravesite, that I just believed that one message when I was a little girl, just, you know, when my birth father is pounding my mother's face and blood is spewing all over, I remember, you know, hearing this, there's got to be something more to life than this. And so I just feel like when we start to hear those messages and start to feel that guidance, start to believe in your intuition, and know that there are programs. I think it's really important to say this because there will be people listening that they've tried self-help books, they've gone to personal development, they've done all the right things to change their life, and they still feel stuck. What happens from 0 to 8 years old, we are programmed on how we're going to react to our life. So if there was significant trauma in your life, or if there's one traumatic event in your life that created this unworthiness, this unlovableness, this shame, any of that created this belief as your young child in your head, you start to repeat those patterns from the program, that subconscious inside you, until you learn that there's something that's driving that, until you're actually in one of the healing modalities that I'm a master in is I helped people be able to go back and reframe that story and create a new story around there with new information. So even my birth father shot at me, or at us, my mom, my sister and I, as 3 or 4 year old, I don't know the exact timing. And that circumstance created this belief that I was unworthy, unlovable, and not, and didn't deserve to be protected. And as I went through this healing modality that I'm a master in, I created a new story around that if my father was able to be the person he was, can you imagine the pain and turmoil he went through to be who he was? And again, I also believe that we have contracts with the people that are here. We create contracts from a higher level before we come here. And so if he was willing to play that role in my life, so where I could do what I'm doing today, I can only hold compassion for him. For him to be in that space, how horrible of a life for him was that? So I'm able to have more compassion and more love for myself and for others. And so what people do is they go through life seeking on the outside what they don't feel that they are on the inside. So seeking acceptance, seeking love, seeking worthiness. And that caused me to join multiple churches and multiple marriages. And so I was constantly seeking on the outside for me to be loved or to prove that I was lovable. But as I started to work through those healing and started to remove those layers, I started to realize that my light inside me shines just as bright as everyone else. It just may be a little dimmer because of the experience I've had. So I get to work through that. And now I'm like, okay, I am light, just like you are, Roy, and you are, Lorianne, and you are, listener. We are light, and we all get to use our own light to shine. We don't need to seek it on the outside. And it shifts your patterns. It shifts your beliefs. It starts to transmute basically what was there, and it's no longer there.
Well, how can our listeners reach out to you?
My website is my full name, CathleenElle.com. Any of my social media, with the exception of Twitter, is Cathleen Elle Inspires. And that's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the social media. And then Twitter is just Cathleen Elle. And please, on Amazon, Shattered Together, A Mother's Journey from Grief to Belief. It's a book. It's a #1 international bestseller. And it's a book that assists people in moving through their loss. While it's my story of healing, at the end of each chapter, there is a practice that you can start to implement in your life. And so it's a little memoir, a little self-help, and a little inspiration. So I really encourage you to either buy one for yourself, and then buy one for a friend and share it, because it truly is a tool to move through any loss in your life. It could be a job, divorce, anything at all.
Beautiful. And just quickly, you were speaking before we got on that you have a program coming as well. Can they find all that information on your website?
Yes, they can find it on my website. I got a 5-week program starting the 18th of May. It's called Grief to Belief. And once a week, we'll gather together in a group and actually work through some of these healing modalities that I've talked about, so people can start to step into the healing journey with the support that's there and the understanding of like minds. And it's really a sacred circle is what I create from that. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here with us today.
Yes,
Thank you
thank you
both.
so much. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.